Hey, how's it going, everyone? We're gonna do a trading card game and card gaming tier list today, and I have a couple of games on the tier list already. The ones on the tier list right now are pretty much the games that I haven't played personally. I did consult some players within the TCG sphere. However, all the games that you see at the bottom that are in the pinned images right now, these are all games that I have actively played, or at least tried to play in the past couple of years or so. So as you can see, I've played quite a lot of games. I've been invested in quite a few of them. Some of these were sent to me as more of a review style product, like Alpha Clash. They sent me a booster box as well as some starter decks, which I had a lot of fun with. I'm just going to be as honest as possible how I feel about these. And of course, your opinion may differ, but I have certain things that I look for in a card game, and maybe you look for different things. It all depends on person to person, right? One of the things that doesn't really bother me personally is the price of card games. Like if I had to list these with by price, then Pokemon would be an S tier and everything else would be way below that, because a lot of these card games are quite expensive to upkeep or to get into, especially games like Flesh and Blood. You need upwards of $1,000 to even build a deck. It's sometimes almost prohibitively expensive that you can't really play the game at a true competitive level until you have spent a significant amount of money to get all the tools and the gear that you need to be able to play properly. But it is what it is. Card gaming is a luxury hobby, and I think hobbies in general are allowed to cost some money. If you take up, say, some martial arts class, you also need to buy gear, all the weapons and stuff to train with, which can also get quite expensive. So I'm quite okay with card gaming in general having a price tag attached to it. Do leave a comment down below in the comment section, letting me know which games I'm wrong about and what points I should consider. So if I do one of these videos again in the future, I will definitely keep your comment in mind. So first things first, Lorcana. I played Lorcana for about a month or two. I quite like the game. It's kind of reminiscent of games like Match the Gathering, where they take away the whole trying to take down your opponent's life total principle, and they give a new spin to it with the lore counters and stuff like that. Also, I like that nowadays a lot of card games don't use something like a land system that you see in Match the Gathering, where you can just use other cards in your deck in order to generate resources to be able to play the cards that you want to play. I'm a big fan of that. However, from personal experience, having played Lorcana quite a bit, I do feel that the game has some balance issues. There are certain decks and archetypes that really outshine everything else in the game. And usually that's only by a small margin. But ever since set 1 up until set 4, where I quit, I kept seeing that there are certain decks that are just completely dominating the meta, certain combos that are just completely unbeatable by a large portion of the decks in the game. So in terms of quality of the cards, they are very high quality. The print quality is good. The production quality is very good as well. So it's a very solid product in terms of card games in general. It's also relatively easy to pick up. It is not too difficult to play. I do like about this that when you look at the community for Lorcana, it's very diverse. Like when you look at a game like Match the Gathering, if I go to a locals and let's say there's 20 people there, there's a high chance that 20 out of 20 of them are going to be men. But with Lorcana, if I go to locals and there's 20 to 30 people there, like 1/3 to half of them are female members of the community, which is very nice to see. However, Lorcana, I ended up selling all of it. The game wasn't really for me. Was a little bit too simple. The combos felt a little bit too inconsistent, and because of the balance issues. Another reason why I quit Lorcana is we had Inkborn or Pixelborn or whatever it was called, like a two-party online client where you could play the game, practice it, and play it with friends. However, Disney shutting that one down had really dampened my motivation to play this game at all, because as you can see, there's a lot of games out there that I play, and I have a very limited amount of time to decide when I do devote a day in my week to play a game, which one I will actually end up playing, and Disney just isn't it. But it's still a very solid game. I'm gonna place it in the A tier. It's a very good game. I like it a lot, but it's just not up there yet. Then next up we have Alpha Clash. Alpha Clash is actually remarkably similar to Lorcana and some of these other games in the list there. I got it sent to me. It's a very solid game. It kind of takes a trope of the whole superhero style where similar to like DC or Marvel, but they have set up like the whole own comic book series. They have a very deep lore. I think this can really become a big IP in the long run. It has a lot of potential. I liked Alpha Clash a lot. It was relatively balanced, which is something that I like to see. And I do think this is an A-tier game. I think in terms of balance and gameplay potential, it's probably even slightly better than Lorcana. So I'm going to put that one right in front of Lorcana like this. I think this is a solid placement for Alpha Clash in general. Next up, we have Altered. Altered has a system that is very interesting where you can scan your cards and add them to a digital collection. And then you can use your digital collection to play with those cards online in something called Board Game Arena. Then they're also setting up a system where you can print the cards that you own digitally so that you can put them into your deck. If you lose a card, you can print multiple additional copies too if you want to have them for multiple decks. And this thing alone, like this digital file system that you own the card digitally to be able to be allowed to play it, is very interesting to me, and I think it has a lot of potential. However, Altered also has something that's called the unique cards, and unique cards are basically cards that only one of those exists in the entire world. Like you can have a regular card, but then something is different in that card, like maybe it has an extra attack point, or it has a lower cost, or it has a different ability when playing it or discarding it. And by having that card is completely one of one unique, which at its very core, it's a very interesting and a fun mechanic. I have to say, like, I've had a lot of fun with the uniques that I do have in my collection. But on the other hand, I do have to admit that there are some uniques that are just so ridiculously strong compared to other uniques that sometimes the games can feel a bit warping. It's not exactly pay to win because you can build your deck around it to accommodate if your opponent plays something like this, that you can kind of stop the whole combo from popping off. But at the same time, sometimes it does feel a little bit out of balance, and you have everything set up, you're about to win, and then suddenly your opponent starts playing some really ridiculous, unique combo that you didn't even know existed, or that you wouldn't have thought that they have in their collection. So because of that, I should be taking points away from Altered. However, I've been having so much fun with this game, even though the balance is a mess, and certain heroes that are definitely much stronger than other heroes. The game is just so much fun to play, and having the whole digital system attached to it that you can sell cards online to friends, or you can lend it to friends, like here you go, gift it to them, they can go play an event with it online, and once they're done, they just send it back to you. It's just such a fun and innovative system that I can't help but putting this game up in S tier. Only one set has released so far. There is a lot of potential with Altered. There's also a very big issue with the uniques that are good being incredibly expensive. Like some of them are $200 all the way up to $2,000 or euro each, which is a very high price tag, especially for a game that doesn't really have much going on in terms of organized plays and big events yet. So the price tags are only going to go up once those do start running, but it's a solid game, really cool. The artwork is cool, the lore is cool, everything about it is just cool. I really like it, and I'm going to put it in S tier just for that. Maybe it's a bit biased, but I just like Altered as a game a lot. Next up, we have Flesh and Blood. Well, Flesh and Blood is my bread and butter. I coach a couple of people online, and Flesh and Blood is the main game that people come to me for coaching sessions. I do other games as well, but usually it's just a couple of sessions. But when it comes to Flesh and Blood in particular, people just keep coming back because this game is so skill-driven that it's a bit of a player trap, because once you start getting good at this game, it's kind of hard to let go. It's a very difficult game to get good at in the early days when you start playing this, but it's just so balanced, and there's such low variance compared to other trading card games out there that skill expression is a huge thing in Flesh and Blood. At the same time, it does mean that you pretty much need to have a perfect knowledge of all the cards that are in the game, but you also need to know what your opponent's deck might potentially have in it, which is a bit of a hurdle for new players to get over because it takes a long time to get familiar with all the cards out there. And then on top of that, you need to get into the flow of playing well, which takes yet another 50 to 100 games. It's a tough game to get into. There are some people that are just trading card game geniuses that get into it instantly and they do well regardless, but there's so many people that start this game and they play a couple of armories with just like a local event. They lose everything, they join another one, they lose everything. At that point, they've been losing pretty much every game for an entire month and they just don't feel motivated to play anymore. People enjoy winning. Like, people play games because they want to have a chance to win. And sometimes the difficulty of this game can be so jarring for new players that it kind of scares them away. And it's also, at the same time, it is a very difficult game. And then it's also quite an expensive game. So you get into this situation where new players join, they don't buy the super expensive cards, which aren't that important. But when you're a completely new player, they do give you that little bit of an edge to stand a bit more of a chance against an experienced player. So you don't have the expensive cards, you don't have the experience to play the game well. Well, it's just a recipe for disaster and people just feel helpless. They don't know what to do and they end up giving up. And it's a real pity because it's probably the best TCG out there at the moment, or at least one of the best TCGs out there. I'm still going to put it in S tier though. Flesh and Blood is absolutely amazing. Probably one of the most balanced and better TCGs out there, but cost, difficulty and all of that makes it difficult for them to have constant flow of new players getting into the game. I really hope that they release a casual play mode at some point where people don't need to have all this meta knowledge and card-based knowledge so that they can just enjoy the game, have fun with it, and then once they're comfortable with it, they can always just grow into a more competitive scene. But for now, it's an S-tier game. Great game, perfect game. I really like it. Hearthstone, Heroes of Warcraft. So this is a digital game. You can play it on your phone as well. It used to be one of my favorite card games of all time. However, the game has undergone so much power creep and so many weird decision making from the company that has kind of become like a big orangey mess. Like, there is so much going on. Like, you play a card and sometimes 3 or 4 effects will resolve right after playing it, completely altering the entire board state and whatever your opponent has been trying to build up towards. Because of this, I don't think Hearthstone is all that balanced anymore. Playstyle and the gameplay is just so volatile that you can't set anything up, that I don't feel that Hearthstone is that great of a game anymore, and it really pains me because I used to absolutely love this game. It's just too much power creep. Sometimes they release a format where you can explore only older sets, like I think they call it the twist format or something like that, where they have like a little bit of a rule adjustment, but you can play with old sets. Those are fun and those give me a lot of joy every now and then, but I can't put it higher than B tier. This used to be an S tier game for sure, but at the moment it's just not there anymore. Too much has happened and the game might even need to have a full reset. I just don't think it's an amazing game anymore. And the same goes for the online version of Shadowverse. Keep in mind, I have Shadowverse, the online game, as well as Shadowverse, the physical game here, the TCG card game. So I will be covering both of these. The online game, it's almost like a Hearthstone clone, except in Shadowverse, they try to even knock it up a notch by making the things you play even more insane with so many effects going on. I'm going to put this one in C tier. This used to be an S tier game to me, and the Shadowverse Online used to be at least an A tier game to me. I spent a lot of time playing these, a very high ranked in Shadowverse as well, but it just isn't it anymore. The card game, however, is lower power level than the online game. It has some twists and differences with the online game, but it's a solid game. It's not like a top tier good game, but there's a lot of similarity to games like Alpha Clash. It's a very good game. I'm gonna put this one in upper B tier, like right under Hearthstone, maybe even edging into A tier, but it's not perfect. It's not the most amazing game. There's definitely balance issues with this game as well, but still a solid B tier game. Next up, we have Marvel Snap. Marvel Snap is again an online game. You can play it on your mobile. I believe there's a PC version as well nowadays on Steam. I originally really loved this game. It was really well balanced. You could gradually earn cards by increasing your collection level. However, I don't know why, but the past year or so, it has reached a point that if you want your collection to be up to date and to have access to good cards that are relevant, you are almost forced to spend a significant amount of money just to have the cards to play with. And like I said earlier in the video, I'm not opposed to people spending money on a hobby. Designers and gaming companies do need to earn profit. However, Marvel Snap is doing something that I feel is very disgusting, which is they will release a card in its digital form. They will put it behind some kind of a paywall, like either you need to spend money to increase your collection level so that you can randomly pull it, or they put it inside a bottle or something like that. And you end up into situations where they will release a card that they know is busted, like they even admit that when they release it that they know the card was too good, but they release it anyway. And then you want to play that card because you want to be able to compete with other players. You spend money to obtain that card. You play with it for 1 or 2 weeks. And then suddenly, what does the company do? They will nerf that card, make it completely useless, take away everything. You've spent a lot of money on a card that you can't use. And this is a practice that they've been doing quite frequently, that they will release an overpowered card, people buy into it, and then after a week or two, suddenly the card is nerfed, and along with it, the whole deck that you might have built around it without any compensation, no refunds, nothing. It really feels like a bait and switch. I'm not a fan of it. Even though Marvel Snap is a great game at its core, I'm gonna place it down in the D tier because I feel they are doing some really predatory tactics to try and get you to buy overpowered cards, and then they just pull the rug and give you a useless card instead. If you play it casually, I can highly recommend it, but with the current way of doing things, not a fan of it. I'm gonna place it in D tier. Next up, we have Magic the Gathering, the OG TCG that probably started the journey for most of all these other games in the world. It's an amazing game. We have so many different formats, like Pioneer at this point of time is in a great place. I really like Pioneer. I really absolutely adore what Standard is doing right now, especially with the Foundations release. We have a lot of very nostalgic cards, really fun gameplay. I really love it a lot. Then we have formats like Commander, of course, where you have a lot of personal expression and creativity in terms of deck building, or you can go fully into the competitive EDH scene, where you can build like a really well-tuned competitive deck with lots of different cards because you can only run one of each card. It's still a very good game. The only issue I have with Magic the Gathering, and well, it's the reason why I started playing Flesh and Blood, is still the land system. And I know there are people out there that keep telling me like the land system is a feature, not a bug, when it comes to Magic the Gathering, and I have started to appreciate the land system for one reason that I'll get into in a moment, but I don't like the feeling if you go to a big tournament like a Mythic Championship or a big local event like a store qualifier, that you sit down, you shuffle up the deck that you've been practicing for months, you draw your hand, you have no lands. You draw another hand, you have only one land, so you need to take another mulligan. On, and suddenly you have lost the first game before you even made a single play. And I know that these kind of situations, they only happen occasionally, but I've run into issues like this on multiple occasions that I was playing at a big event with a lot at stake. And then you get these kind of weird scenarios where you either draw way too little land or you draw way too much land and you just lose the game because of that. And it really stinks. Like I've been in situations, even in the online client that I was in the Mythic Championship, you get completely screwed over by RNG. Like you never had a chance to see how good your opponent is as a player. You just got completely blown out of water by RNG, which feels very sad. However, I do think it's a good thing at the same time. And the reason why I think that the land system is a good thing is because if I look at games like Flesh and Blood as an example, Flesh and Blood is so skill driven and so balanced, and there's so little RNG in that game that it almost entirely depends on who is the better pilot sitting down at the table, which will decide who is going to be winning that game. It kind of results in a situation, at least in my local scene, where it's hard to have new player retention because new players have no chance of winning because there's so little RNG going on. So once they have made 2 or 3 bad decisions during the game, they've pretty much already lost and they don't know it yet. With a game like Magic the Gathering, it doesn't matter how good of a player you are yourself or how bad of a player you are yourself. When you sit down against somebody, they might get land screwed, they might get land flooded, and if they do, then you can get a win, even if you're not that good at the game yet. Because of this, you end up into these situations where sometimes there's a locals running and you see a new player join and they win the whole thing. And I think that's a good thing because it allows new players to have a chance at winning, even though they haven't put in the work and they don't have the experience as much as other players out there. So in that regard, I do think having the RNG in the game is a good thing because it keeps it accessible for newer players. I'm gonna place Magic in the very upper A tier, right over here at the moment. It's one of the best games in the world, one of the best TCGs ever made. However, I do think there are some issues with the game that as a competitive player, I would like to see otherwise, but it just is what it is. It's still a great game. I love playing Commander. I absolutely adore playing Pioneer as well, so I'm a fan of it. Then we'll have Star Wars Unlimited. Star Wars Unlimited kind of does the same sort of gameplay as Lorcana does, where you play units and you put cards from your hand into your resources, or like Magic the Gathering. You can kind of see Star Wars Unlimited. It's like Magic the Gathering, except you start with 2 lands in play, and the lands are pretty much any card in your hand. Like any card in your hand, you can put face down as a resource to generate mana or resources for you. And because of that, you don't need to draw into lands. You always have cards to resource to be able to fuel your plays. And it's more about deck building and how good you are at the game itself in order to make an impact. I really like it. I'm not sure if Star Wars Unlimited is as good as a game as Magic the Gathering yet, but it's getting really close to it. I'm gonna place it in the A tier, like right above Magic the Gathering right here. I think if this game has a couple more sets, it's gonna creep in front of Magic the Gathering and then eventually creep up into the S tier in terms of gameplay and everything like that. I think it's a very solid game. I think I like it a little bit more than Altered even, but there are some things that I would like the game to adjust a little bit. One of the things that is a little bit of a gripe with me is the comic book art style that they use for the cards. The artwork on the cards makes this feel more like a board game than a traditional card game. Because of that, I do think that they are kind of missing the opportunity gaining customers, because many times I introduce people to Star Wars Unlimited and the first thing that people mention is that they don't like the artwork, and because of that they don't want to give the game a chance. I do hope for future releases that they get a more detailed art style going on, similar to maybe what Star Wars Destiny used to be. But other than that, the game is quite balanced. It's very skill driven, which is something I like. You don't get mana screwed. You can build a lot of different playstyles. Almost every hero is viable in this game, which is another big thing that I'm a big fan of. You know what? Just to give credit to the balance of the game, I'm gonna place it in S tier. I think it deserves to be up there as a very solid game, and I think if you haven't given it a chance, you should definitely try it. I put a budget Sabine deck on the channel a couple of months ago. If you build that deck, it's still good to go in the current format. It's not as great. Like, you could make it better with some of the newer cards that got released recently, but you can build a budget deck around $20 and still do relatively well at a locals or something like that. So I do think you should give it a try if you haven't. Then we have the Pokemon trading card game and Pokemon trading card game Pocket. Pocket is a game that got released on mobile very recently. One thing that Pokemon does really well and that I'm a big fan of is that all the cards that they release them in multiple art styles. So you have the really rare versions of cards, but you also have cheap, accessible versions of cards. Because of this, Pokemon as a whole, as a card game, is very accessible financially. And I know, again, that earlier I mentioned that I don't want cost to be a factor for deciding where to place a game in this tier list, but I do think because Pokemon is so accessible that you can get a lower rarity version of a card and then be able to play with it at a big event just as well as somebody that has the fully upgraded maximum rarity version of the deck. I think that's a really good thing that a lot of other card games should take notes of, especially games like Flesh and Blood. I wish they had lower rarity versions of the legendaries, for example, so that new players have these cards available to them. I don't care if they made those cards ugly, but I do think accessibility of cards is very important to keep a card game growing. The sad thing though, I don't think Pokemon the Trading Card Game is that great of a card game. It's fun, don't get me wrong, I definitely had a lot of fun with it, but the power creep that this game has gone through is so through the roof that with your opening hand, you can probably set up everything you need to be able to win in the next 3 turns. Things have gotten so out of hand that you have all these Pokemons that give you multiple prize cards if you knock them out, that it kind of becomes a bit of a race, like who can get to a big attack the earliest to be able to knock something of the opponent out or knock out whatever they were trying to set up to start beating you with. It doesn't really feel that much like a game to me anymore. I used to love this game when I was a kid. I played it a lot locally. I also played it at tournaments, but it's just lacking. It's just not that great of a game anymore, so I'm gonna place this in B tier. Pokemon Trading Card Game Pocket, on the other hand, it has more of the old school Pokemon feel without all the power creep. And they made some adjustments to make the game a bit more of a smoother playing experience when you play it on mobile. However, I do think that the card pool right now is a bit limited. There are a couple of decks that are currently in the top, like Pikachu EX and Mewtwo EX. And while you can definitely build off meta decks that still perform well, the game is a bit lacking in terms of gameplay. Right now, it feels more like a collecting simulator that you log in every day to try and get some of those really nice artwork digital cards. But I don't think the game is all that great as a card game at the moment. I do think when more sets release and if they actually implement something like a competitive ladder and have more rewards for actually playing the game, that I would definitely place this in a higher tier. But at the moment, gameplay-wise, I think Pokemon Pocket is just a C-tier game. It's nice that they are trying to do something different where you're collecting cards every day and you can get those really beautiful art cards that have an animation and such, but it's not that good of a game. And I'm gonna be honest, for me that's a good thing, because if this were an amazing game, then I would probably get addicted to it and I would be playing it day and night, which is something that I really want to stop myself from doing, but it's just not that good yet. Next up, let's start from One Piece, Dragon Ball, and then finally we end up at Yu-Gi-Oh! So we go from right to left for the time being. Let's do it like this. So One Piece, a really good game, very solid at its core. However, I have run into some issues during tournaments that kind of scared me away from the game. And one of the things is because of the way that you counter with cards from your hand, it's very easy for opponents to manipulate the game state by, for example, drawing an extra card when you don't realize it, or they misrepresent what they're actually countering. Like they will say they are countering for 13,000 while they only have 12,000 on the board. I have run into some issues where my opponents were just cheating during events. It just doesn't feel nice when there's so little you can do to stop them from doing it because of the way that the game flows. But other than that, if we take away the whole cheating aspect of One Piece, as a game itself, it's very fun. It's decently balanced. Certainly certain heroes that are stronger than other ones. However, you can build most heroes in this, or leaders they're called in this game. You can build most leaders up to a certain competitive level that they can at least go toe to toe with some of the top tier decks out there. It's a very solid game. I do think though, because it is a Bandai game, that in the long run we're going to be seeing a lot of power creep, and it's probably going to get worse and worse to the point that it no longer feels like a game. But I think for the time being, it's still a very solid game. I don't play it much myself anymore, and I'm probably going to be selling off my collection because it just isn't for me in regards to people cheating and Bandai not really taking action against cheaters, which is quite sad, but it's a fun game overall. I think if I had to place it somewhere here, where would I place it? It's not as good as Alpha Clash, I would say. It's more fun than Lorcana. I think I would place it somewhere around here. This would be a good spot to have One Piece at. Very solid game, and it's a lot of fun to play, but if you do play it, you really need to be very closely watching everything that your opponent is doing, because the amount of cheating that goes on in this game is just stupid. Like, it just doesn't feel good, especially in the webcam events, so keep an eye out for that. So next up we have Dragon Ball Super, the card game. This one got a re-release. I believe it's called Fusion World recently. Fusion World, at least at a local level, never really took off. And Dragon Ball Z Super, the original card game, it was very popular in the beginning, but again, this is also like One Piece, a Bandai game. And Bandai, they are just notorious for power creeping the game to such a state that whatever deck you might have when a new set releases is probably a pile of junk. And it's really sad that they have to do this, but it's kind of like the business model, right? They want to keep things fresh. They power creep the crap out of something to make it feel more powerful and to get people to buy the product. And then when the game is starting to lose popularity because it no longer feels like a game, they just make a new game. Now it's One Piece. It's probably going to be something else in the future. I believe they are working on a detective something from an anime. Please quote me what game it is, but I don't know. I think Dragon Ball as a game is not that great anymore, similar to Digimon, which, from what I've heard, I haven't played Digimon myself, but from what I've heard, people had a lot of good things to say about Digimon, but at them. So I think I have to place this one somewhere around the D tier. Again, bad business practices, in my opinion, to power creep something to such an extent that you completely invalidate people's collection, but this what it is. Like, you see this a lot with Japanese games, Japanese card games in general. Yu-Gi-Oh! Is also notorious for that, like continuously power creeping stuff. And then you have a good deck, and then they will release a bunch of reprints to get you to buy the reprints, and then they ban the reprints a couple of weeks later. It's just a very weird, predatory business practice that I'm not a fan of. But yeah, in regards to Yu-Gi-Oh!, I think Yu-Gi-Oh!, similar to Flesh and Blood, is a game that has very high consistency. Like, you can build your deck up to like 75% consistency as far as I remember. And then at the same time, it's a very high skill-intensive game. The problem with Yu-Gi-Oh! In its current form, in my opinion, though, is that back in the day, you also had that skill expression like 5, 6, even 10 years ago. But nowadays, the cards, they just have so much text and so much going on that to master Yu-Gi-Oh! Can be so frustratingly difficult, just because you need to know all the interactions of all the different viable archetypes out there, that it sometimes feels like a chore just to stay up to date, especially when there's also quite a lot of people that like to play off-meta decks, which is something I like, by the way. I do like people expressing themselves with off-meta decks, but there's just so much information thrown at you whenever you play this game and when a new set or a new deck releases, that it's a game that you cannot just buy a deck, go to locals and have fun with. There's just too much going on. You need to be aware of so many effects at the same time. And what surprises me is that Yu-Gi-Oh! Is so immensely popular. If I look at a local level, for example, Yu-Gi-Oh! Locals, they never seem to fail. They draw in so much attention, and they draw in so many players that absolutely love to play this game. This is a kind of commitment that I don't see in other games like Flesh and Blood that are equally difficult to play. But Yu-Gi-Oh! Players, they are next level. They are hardcore. They love the game. They continue playing the game, which is something that I can really respect. However, as somebody like myself that plays many games at the same time, it's sometimes too much information. I just don't have time to keep track of everything. And in a way, I should probably drop Flesh and Blood in that regard as well, because it's always also a huge time sink to stay up to date in that game. But I don't know, like I still like Flesh and Blood better. And Yu-Gi-Oh, if they can release a format that is more like old school Yu-Gi-Oh, they did it for a while with Speed Duels, I believe it was called, which I kind of liked. But it seems like Konami just keeps on wanting to go back to like the fully fledged, fully optimized version of what Yu-Gi-Oh is nowadays. I think Yu-Gi-Oh is in dire need of a full reset. I wish we could really go back to all the formats. And I know people will tell me, but you can go play the Goat format or Edison format. But at the same time, there's no local community for formats like this, or at least none that I know of. So I don't think that's really much of an option either. I think the only way for myself to start playing this game again physically, I think that it needs to do a full-on reset or something similar to really tone down the power level of this game, or at the very least make sure that the card text on the cards gets reduced so much that you can just read the card that the opponent is playing and then you know like that's what they're trying to do. Because right now, if you ask your opponent what does that card do and they hand it to you, it's like almost like it's like half a page of text on these cards. There's so much text on Yu-Gi-Oh cards. It's frustrating. On the other hand, it has been a great source for YouTube content. Like you've probably seen some of my Yu-Gi-Oh videos. They are my best performing videos of pretty much any TCG out there, because it's just so hard to learn all these effects that people really like to have all this stuff summarized to get it into a bite-sized form that they can start learning and playing these decks or to play against them. So it's good on the one hand as a content creator because you can make endless content out of a difficult game like this. I think it's too much. There's just too much going on. Same thing with Master Duel, which is pretty much modern Yu-Gi-Oh, but it's just a couple of months behind in terms of releases. If I had to place Yu-Gi-Oh somewhere on this tier list though, I would place it in upper B tier because it's still an absolutely amazing game. It's one of the best games out there, definitely. But I think the card text and the amount of text on the cards is it's too much. It really is too much. I'm sorry to say. But yeah, I think as this on the screen right now, currently this is my card gaming tier list. I of course like Grand Archive, Final Fantasy, and Vanguard. I got advice from other players out there. I cannot say much about these games, but let me know what you think. Do you think this is similar to how you feel about the games that you currently play? And if not, let me know which ones you would swap around, like which one you would play where and why. And if there are things that I'm completely missing the mark on, again, share it down in the comments. Maybe send some links as well in the comments so that I can read those things as well, because I do make mistakes. So let me know down there and I will read all the comments. I will also try to reply to every single one of them. And if you like card gaming content, you should probably subscribe to this channel because I like to cover a large range of card games, so you will be right at home here for the time being. I hope to see you again the next time and keep having fun playing card games. Take care.